This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta. Stack the deck in your favor in 2025 with a stacked cereals lineup of crop protection products from Syngenta. With proven technology for exceptional disease control and greater plant resilience, you'll find game-changing solutions for your wheat crop. Visit syngenta.ca for more info.
Good day and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, March the 19th. On this update of the Word, it's Safety Week. We have to touch on that. Lots of cool updates over the last week. More on snow mold, learning, and then sulphur, nitrogen, and hopefully a quick one on red clover if I can get that far before I run out of time. Let's go! Yes, so 1 minute of shameless Wheat Pete self-promotion. Lots of you have asked. I do community theater. I think most of you know that. I am in another play. It's in Embro. It opens a week this Friday, March the 28th. We run that weekend and the following weekend. If you're in the area, come on out and see it. It's a ton of fun. You get to see Wheat Pete in a totally different scenario. Everyone should have some kind of a distraction from agriculture, because I'll tell you, agriculture will swallow you up. And it's a great career. It's a great industry to be in. But you need that outside influence. For Pete, it is his thespian adventures in community theater. And I get to meet all sorts of people from all walks of life. And it's just that change is as good as a rest mentality. Okay, next. Yes, it is Farm Safety Week. And I don't want to harp on this too much. I do lots on it, but it is so important. So it's spring. We're shipping grain. We're going to be in bins. For goodness sakes, bin safety. You do not ever get into a bin without somebody outside and with all the electrical stuff locked out. We don't want anybody sucked into the grain mass. We don't want anybody getting tied up in the sweep auger. These things they are easily preventable. Please think twice. Act once. Similarly, going down the road, it's a great time of the year to make sure we're having a few warm days. That's awesome. Just make sure you've got good SMV signs. You've got all the lights working, and that we're doing everything we can to be safe, and that's really quite important. Next, so at the Grain Farmers Ontario meeting yesterday, and some really great presentations and some great interactions as well. The one thing that the very first, it was the U.S. Farm Report. They did that with Tyne Morgan, and one of the comments from one of the panelists was, expect this current volatility to continue for the next 4 years. And I just go, oh my gosh. 4 years of this is going to be harsh. So a couple of notes on that. It increases the stress level. There is no doubt about that. So please, reach out, talk to each other, pick up the phone, do the Wheat Pete 15. But the other thing that I think we really have to do is be prepared to take advantage when we get those gifts in marketing. So we had the gift that USDA gave us in January. We had a nice little run-up, an opportunity to sell in February. Hopefully people took advantage of that. Maybe we get that another little run-up. But one of the comments was, be prepared, have some sell orders in, so that if it hits, for example, $6 corn, if that's your magic number, for goodness sakes, have that in. So if it hits it, you trigger a sale. Because in this volatility, things happen really quickly, and the market can have just some pretty massive swings from that perspective. And just the way it's going to be, I guess, for at least the foreseeable future. And the other thing about grain farmers that I just want to mention is so cool. to see so many younger people coming into agriculture, and some of them actually make a point of coming up to Wheat Pete and saying hi and having a question. So I met Tom from Essex and had just a great question. Isaac was across the room, didn't make it over to say hi, but did send out a tweet that at least he saw me. Next time, Isaac, we just got a chat. I had a great chat with Jake and Kelvin and Carson. And yeah, if you see me at a meeting, for goodness sakes, come up, say hi. And if you have a question, that's what makes Wheat Pete tick. All right, going to move on and some updates. So first off, on insect survival, had several questions. There's a great article out of University of Minnesota. Now remember, Minnesota is further north than we are, so it doesn't relate one-to-one. But what was really interesting in that article was that the north end, the top end of Minnesota, it got cold enough, they think, to have some insect mortality. 25%. It's always hard to predict. Last year, we had no insect mortality, had no winter. It's just the way it was. This year, some insect mortality, but not certainly enough to say that we don't have to get out there and scout. Unfortunately, the upside is that it has been colder further south, so things like black cutworm or potato leafhopper, we hope that they will be a little later coming up because they come up from their overwintering areas in Mexico or in Texas, and this year they won't have wintered as far north. Even stripe rust fits into that category as well. Hopefully they are a little bit later to get here and don't cause as much of a problem. Andrew sending me just a great picture about the impact of his rye cover crop versus right across the road where the neighbor had done moldboard plowing. And we'll include a couple of those in the post, but it just, what a huge impact that it makes because you have that good rye cover. And Andrew, by the way, I think there's some snow mold in that rye cover, so you need to assess that. But yeah, no erosion. You go across the road and just a gully washer going across that field and soil erosion out the yin-yang. Here in the deep southwest, we've been extremely fortunate. Had a great conversation with Dave at GFO about how nice the melt has been in this part of the world. We didn't get a lot of rain. We got warm temperatures. The snow left fairly slowly. A little bit of ponding, not much. Conversely, you get up into the Ottawa Valley, they had no melt, and talking with Lindsay up in that Kinburn area on Sunday, just hammered with inches of rain. So floods and ponds and just all that stuff, just the way that the winter works. And some people are lucky and others not so much. By the way, while we're sitting here in excellent shape from a moisture standpoint, talking with Mark, my good friend Mark out of Delmarva, that Delaware, Maryland area, they are extremely dry. They were incredibly dry last year, and it hasn't stopped. So they have moisture in the top foot. They're going to be able to plant. But once you go below that top foot, it is totally dry until he hits at least 3 and often 4 feet before he finds moisture. That's sort of often Western Canadian conditions, and you just go, wow, that's right along the Atlantic Ocean in the eastern seaboard where we normally have no worries about drought. That's quite interesting. So things are different. There's no doubt about that. Hey, the other question, lots of people saying, has the wheat broken dormancy? And man, the wheat comes out from under the snow. Gosh, it looks good. Yeah, that's because under the snow, those leaves are protected and they went under the snow green, so they come out from under the snow green. And guess what? Within a week or 2 or 10 days, who knows, you are all going to be leaving messages for Wheat Pete saying, my wheat's dying, because those old leaves, as they get exposed to wind and sun and fluctuating temperatures, for the most part, they're quite old. My own wheat, the knolls, I have quite a few knolls where my wheat is this year. The snow left the knolls first because the wind swept most of the snow away. It already looks when you drive past that there's no wheat on the knolls. It's all dead. No, it's just gone purple because those leaves are done, and it's 100% fine. It's just got to get some new growth. So just be prepared that wheat this time of year almost always goes off color of some nature. All right, I want to move on. I want to hit again on snow mold, and a great message from Tom with a picture of a wheat field. Now, I've said up until this point that the wheat looks like we didn't have much snow mold. Tom sent me a picture of wheat with snow mold, and I kind of go, okay, like give me a bit of the background, Tom. Hog manure applied, I believe it was on September the 15th, and then the wheat planted September the 17th, so early planted wheat, lots of nitrogen, tremendous top growth. When you get that tremendous top growth, you get more snow mold. The snow mold spreads from leaf to leaf, and we just get lots more snow mold. So we are continue to see, Joanna sent some pictures of cereal rye. Her cereal rye, she thinks, is an entire write-off. 90% of the crowns are mush, and that's the way you determine in snow mold whether or not the crop will come back. You dig up the crowns, and if they are firm and white on the inside, even though the leaves are gone, good chance it'll come back. Might be hurt a little bit, but good chance you'll still have a decent crop. If they're mush, man, it's all over. You got to figure out what else you're going to plant. The upside, Joanna says, they had a great snowmobile year. So, yeah, I like the positive thought process there, Joanna, but I expect the dairy cows would have preferred the cereal or the rye forage moving forward. Hey, Adam saying, Peter, I'm catching up on old Word episodes. And you talked about nitrogen on cereal rye versus triticale, and the grower was 60 pounds. You're suggesting 120 or maybe a little more. I thought that the Tom Kilser data said that cereal rye did not respond to nitrogen. Tom Kilser, of course, out of New York State, he's the triticale guru. That cereal rye does not respond to nitrogen the way that triticale does. And so I actually still grow cereal rye because I don't feel like putting on 180 pounds of nitrogen. So Adam, is really interesting. Shane and I did those trials way back when, and we saw zero difference between cereal rye and triticale for nitrogen response curves. And in both crops, we had to get to that 120 pounds of nitrogen to really kind of start getting into the maximum yield. And that wasn't looking at protein. Some of the reason that Kilser is putting more nitrogen on is to keep the protein levels in that cereal forage up in the 18% range. We weren't looking at that. We were just looking strictly at yield. So I'm not sure. Well, our data simply doesn't support that there's a difference between those two. But great point, and thanks for reaching out on that. All right, move on to sulfur. So Lee from Lambton saying, Peter, like you've been talking lots about sulfur and about ATS, ammonium thiosulfate, and how half of it goes backwards. We've been using 4 gallons per acre of ATS. Should we up that? What's the whole story on this sulfur thing? Really cool data that I just received last week, or I believe with last week, from Phil Needham. Everyone will know Phil is one of the superstars of wheat production in North America. He's out of Kentucky. They did a trial last year looking at sulfur sources. And Shane and I did some of this back in the 2011, 2012, 2013 period. But remember, that was when sulfur deficiency was just starting to show up, and we didn't see much difference in source. Now, 2024, and Kentucky data, so got to be a little bit careful, but when you look at Phil's data, it's really, really clear that it takes twice as much ammonium thiosulfate to get the same tissue levels in the wheat crop as it does ammonium sulfate. And that, it makes perfect sense when you do the way the chemistry works. Half of that ammonium thiosulfate goes back to elemental sulfur, not available. The other half becomes sulfate with ammonium sulfate or a sulfate source, whether it's gypsum or it's K-mag, thio, whatever you want to call that potassium magnesium sulfate. So a sulfate source is immediately available, and the thiosulfate is not. And from Phil's data in the tissue, it's quite clear. Interestingly enough, in Phil's data, the ammonium thiosulfate treatments had lower yield, but I think that's related to the weather. They had really low temperatures about the time they applied it. I think they got a lot more leaf burn with the thiosulfate because it's a liquid than they did, and they also had excess rain, so got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but really interesting stuff. And as I said, at GFO, had a good chat with Kelvin. He's putting Tiger 90, I believe he said 30 pounds of Tiger 90, so that's elemental sulfur, but he's putting it in the furrow in the fall with his MAP. Now, he did say, if you do this, that it's just a horrendous product to work with because it's just, the sulfur smell is awful, and you want to shower before you go to bed because otherwise you take it to bed with you. But he's seeing really good sulfur response, and he believes that it's because of the acidification in the band. So, Kelvin, it's a really interesting thought process. In Phil Needham's data, the fall Tiger 90 was just a bust, but it wasn't in the furrow. I'm just not at all convinced that that acidification is going to help enough to keep sulfate available, but it's working for you, something we should consider. Katie out of Manitoba saying, hey, okay, would fall banded ammonium sulfate be the same as spring broadcast? And so, Katie, here's the the famous agronomist answer: it depends. In Manitoba, I think you get too much moisture. The sulfate leaches, it's going to leach out of the root zone. If you're in Saskatchewan, where it's dry, or Alberta, you don't get enough moisture to leach the sulfur out of that zone. I think it would probably work. But you come to Ontario, fall sulfate is just not likely going to hang around enough, or you're going to have to put an awful lot on. Again, in Needham's data, he put on 32 pounds of sulfur in the fall. That's a lot of sulfur, and he did see some response in terms of the tissue tests the next year, so some of it hung around, but that's a lot to put on. Warren saying, all right, Peter, you're talking about early planted soybeans. I'm on light soil. I like to plant my soys early. Want to get some sulfur there? Can I dribble ammonium thiosulfate right on the soybean seed? And I hope everybody listening is going like, no, Warren, don't do it, because ammonium thiosulfate has just tremendous salt levels, and you will have no soybeans. You might have sulfur for the soybeans. You will have no soybeans. All right, move on to nitrogen. Some great questions from Owen and from Mark asking about, do we need to stabilize our early applied nitrogen on our wheat crop? And so I think the answer is pretty much universally no. And the reason is that when we're under really cool soil conditions, and the soil is cold right now, you get out there with that first nitrogen application, the risk of loss is incredibly small. Now, if you put it on, I did get asked by Eric, we're on heavy clay soil. Do we get out there on the frost, on frozen soil, put on some nitrogen? Because, man, when that clay gets wet, we may never get out there again. In that situation, yep, you could definitely put some on. And here's the challenge. If that nitrogen moves into the soil and we get repeated freeze-thaw cycles, we can get some nitrous oxide blowing off. It's something about the freeze-thaw cycles that actually cause that to occur. In that situation, environmentally, you would say, man, maybe I should stabilize it so it doesn't transform to nitrate as quickly. However, cool soils, that transformation's really slow. Agronomically, it's not going to benefit you. So you kind of step back and say, man, there's very few reasons or situations where we would need to stabilize that nitrogen this early. And then the other thing is, don't forget, if you're on that heavy clay soil, that Josh Naselski data, if you're a 25 cation exchange capacity, CEC level, after that, or above that, I should say, zero nitrogen loss. It's like that cation exchange capacity can hang on to that nitrogen, and we just don't see that loss or the need to stabilize that nitrogen. Really interesting stuff. Bill saying, hey, Peter, wheat after bypass peas or beans. In my case, we had edamame soybeans last year. They got too mature. They were bypassed. What's the nitrogen credit? I planted wheat after them. What's the nitrogen credit? Man, Bill, great question. When you do that after peas peas release their nitrogen right when the wheat crop needs it. Shane and I did some great trials back a few years on wheat nitrogen rates following a processing pea crop. Man, if you put more than about 60 pounds of nitrogen on, you better use a growth regulator and don't go over 90 because we just get that really great transfer. With an edamame crop, now that's basically soybeans, and from the data that we have so far, and it's limited, but we would say that the nitrogen release out of the soybeans, like if you grow double crop soybeans, don't harvest them, we don't see a benefit to the wheat crop because they don't seem to release their nitrogen early enough. Pretty interesting, really. So I would say that there could be maybe a 30-pound benefit to the edamame, but certainly not like peas. And that's on really, really slim data, right? I got be careful with that because that's just Peter kind of going through the thought process. Hey, Jeremy, we'll finish up here. Jeremy saying underseeded red clover. So we grow spring wheat, Peter. We put, we know you love red clover, so we put red clover under our spring wheat. And the darn stuff got so big that at harvest we actually had to go out and burn it back so we could harvest the spring wheat. So we thought, that doesn't work very well. So then we tried putting it on with our second nitrogen application. So that was early June. Well, then we didn't get a stand. So what do we do in this situation? Do we just walk away from the red clover? And no, Jeremy, put the red clover on, but use single cut red clover. Make sure it's single cut. Double cut will shoot to flower. It's going to cause you problems in your spring wheat, particularly if your spring wheat doesn't tiller and you don't get a good thick stand. You use single cut clover. If it's single cut, it won't shoot to flower. It will stay vegetative. It won't get over 10 inches tall. You'll be able to combine that spring wheat without any issues whatsoever. You'll still get the 70-pound nitrogen credit. And Jeremy came back and said, well, wait a minute. Harvest the spring wheat, 20th of August. Want a moldboard plow. You won't like that, Pete, but moldboard plow late September. Do I still get, is that enough time? If you get 6 weeks of growth, and I repeat this a lot. If you get 6 weeks of growth on a cover crop, we think that the benefit is definitely there. That single cut red clover is established, so that probably gives you a week or two jump. If you get 4 weeks, I think you have that 70-pound credit, and I think you're good to go. And with that, I am out of time. That's it. That's all. On behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture, this is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, March the 19th. Hey, I hope you can come out and see my play, our play. It's a great bunch of fun. And keep the messages coming, please, because that's what makes Wheat Pete tick. Talk to you next week.